asking a question for the benefit of a Talmud.
Yeah, okay.
If I know, let's say for sure, that I'm not going to be a Rebbe, I'm not going to be a Rebbe in Yeshiva or a Rav of a Shul or something like that, so what's the benefit of learning how to learn? I could use Artscroll. Why should I learn how to learn?
If you're not going to be a Rebbe, you're not going to be teaching, you're going to be a Rabbi in the Shul, what's the benefit of learning how to learn? Why not just use Artscroll? Because the goal of learning is not just to assimilate information. One of the goals of learning is to learn how to think. And you need to learn how to think not just because you're teaching other people, but because you base all your decisions on your thinking. And if your thinking is warped or is primitive or is clumsy, then you're not going to make such good decisions. So when people ask, I suppose it's a similar question, although the form is different, but the point is the same. Why did Ravina Rav Ashi write the Gemara? Why did they write the Rambam? Just tell us what to do. Just give us a list of halachas. The Rambam invented Shulchan Aruchs, just codes of law. There were no codes of law before the Rambam. And it was controversial. He won. I mean, there are hundreds of codes of law today, right? But it was controversial in its time. And the answer is because the Gemara is largely a record of conversations that people had. And in their conversations, you see what kind of arguments they used. You see when they changed their minds, when they admitted they were wrong. You see what kinds of reasons they thought were important reasons. And that's the way you learn how to think. By the way, one of the very sophisticated arguments that Rabbi Eiselman uses against feminists is, if you really think men are prejudiced against women and the rabbis are prejudiced in their interpretation, application of Jewish law, they're protecting their power and so forth and so on, you ought to be able to study the Talmud and find systematic differences in the reasoning when they are talking about subjects dealing with women from the reasoning they use in talking about other subjects. No one has even claimed that was the case. Especially if you read Tosfos, it's cross-referencing all the arguments from one to another, comparing the principles. It's absolutely good. But you wouldn't have a clue at that if you're reading the Mishnah Torah. There's no way of knowing that. So I think that's in straightforward intellectual terms and the terms of running your own life. That's definitely a large part of what's going on. Similarly, this argument was used in favor of women learning Gemara. It has not been accepted, but it's an interesting argument that women ought to have at least some brush with Talmud because otherwise they won't respect what their husbands are learning and they won't respect the basis on which decisions are being made. This way they have some feeling for the seriousness, the depth, the complexity and the mastery that's required to come up with these decisions. They come to respect it more. That's another reason why a person should be learning rather than just relying on Artscroll. A third reason, I think, is social. If you're about tshuva and you're about tshuva yeshiva, you're in a cocoon. Someday you will go out, not the real world, this is the real world, but you'll go out to the social world of a Jewish community and you will discover that the extent to which you are taken seriously is the extent to which you can engage in these kinds of discussions and debates in an acceptable manner. And otherwise, your opinions will not be taken seriously. And this introduces a bias because very often the Baal Tshuva goes on to get some kind of advanced degree and gets a good profession and makes nice money and has lots and lots of respect in the secular area. And in the Jewish community, he's considered to be a beginning student. And that biases him against the rabbis and biases him against the Torah because he doesn't get the satisfaction and the support and the reinforcement that he needs from this. So the more you can do. And also if you're not married, a fourth reason, imagine the woman you want to marry. Think about it. What kind of qualities do you want the woman you want to marry to have? Then ask yourself, what kind of man does she want to marry? Then ask yourself, am I the kind of man who the woman whom I want to marry wants to marry? And usually the answer is no, not at all. So then you have a dilemma, either give up on the woman you want to marry or make yourself into the man she wants to marry. And that also might require learning. So there are a few reasons why it's not just enough to quit, go out and work, and rely on Artscroll. Yeah, well, who else is on base here? This is Q&A. That's what we're doing here. Yeah.
So maybe like on the other end of the spectrum, right? How much work should, especially when somebody, gets a family, Bezrat Hashem, how much work should one do? Like, certainly it would be a big nisayon. It would be a big nisayon if somebody was very wealthy, but on the other hand, it would be a big nisayon if someone was very poor.
Okay, the question is, how much work should you do when you have responsibility for a family? I'm glad you asked it that way. We don't practice the liberal fascism that you have in the campuses, but there are people who will resist this question. You should plan on learning forever, and God will take care of you, and He'll find gold under your pillow every morning, and don't think about it, don't worry about it. I've been trained in a school of responsibility. You sign a ksuba, and the ksuba you say you're responsible for the support of your family, and so on and so on. But there's no answer to your question. There's no rule that's going to apply to everybody in every condition. And the needs of people are different, and not only the needs of, let's say, you, but the needs of your wife and the needs of your children. I know a case, an almost tragic case, where a child grew up as a child of a teacher in a cheder in a city in America, and this guy was a tzaddik, a real tzaddik, to the extent that when the cheder raised the salaries, which happened once every 35 years, raised the salaries of the teachers in the school, he refused to take the raise. That's how he was, right? The only thing was that when it came for the holidays, he didn't buy his kids new shoes because he was a big tzaddik. And he didn't have money, he lived without money. So one of his children went off to derech and got in touch with me, and I corresponded with this child for 3 years until that child was able to remake a commitment to living a Torah life. That's not called being a tzaddik, because you can live with bread and water. So live with bread and water. Bakasha, no salt. Right? But for your children and for the family, that's your responsibility. So I think it'll depend in each case on the particular circumstance of the case. In particular, what kinds of pressures, both working and not working, and you put it well. You put it both. Great wealth is a terrible test. Great poverty is a terrible test. They're both terrible tests. Which is worse? Which is worse, the test of poverty or the test of wealth? So King Solomon is on record. He says, Pen ivaresh v'ganavti, pen esba v'kichashti. Lest I become impoverished and steal, lest I become satisfied, satiated, I would say, and deny. Poverty leads a person to steal. Doesn't lead him to deny God. The Gemara says, at the entranceway to the house, which he's breaking into to steal, he says, please God, let nobody be home. He's not denying God. He just needs money, He's desperate for money, and he's rationalizing in his mind, and he wants God to be on his side. Person who has a lot, especially who thinks he made it for himself and wants to take credit for making it for himself, he can't recognize it as a divine gift, because then it takes him out of it. He can't claim any credit. So he wants to push God out of the picture, and that's a much worse nisayon. So I think that there are a lot of general considerations, but then there's consequences in the particular case are going to be different, and different for the same person at different times of life. So, and also where you live. I don't know if you've gone around in Israel, one of the great things you should pay attention to and learn is how people live with what America would call serious poverty. Let's not talk about great tzaddikim like Rav Chaim Kanievsky, Zecher Tzaddik Livracha, who lived in 2.5 rooms and raised his, I don't know how many children he had, all in 2.5 rooms. Let's not talk about that. But go around to Americans who are living here, and you see that they'll have, let's say, a 4-room apartment, a 5-room apartment with 10 kids. Nobody's on drugs. Nobody's an alcoholic. Nobody's committing suicide. They look reasonably happy. They look reasonably, well put together. And in American terms, they're living on nothing. By the way, a study was done in this country, the country of Israel, the number of people under the poverty line, the official poverty, government poverty line, in the Haredi sector is more than any other sector except for the Arabs, right? Okay. And yet, Haredim live longer, live healthier, and live happier lives than the rest of the population. They could not figure that out. How could that possibly be? No car, no trips to Cyprus and to Brussels and to Los Angeles, no television in every room. And they're happy and they're healthy and they're not psychologically disturbed and so forth and so on. Yeah, because you have a different culture with different values. You can manage in the physical circumstances that are different. They don't want to admit that because they want to think that economics rules everything, but it's not true. So I think that the question is the right question. It's a question of sensitivity. As you go along in life and as you develop, as your circumstances change, you should be in touch with a Rav who knows you and with whom you invest time to share with him, and hopefully that your wife can also go to and speak to share her feelings about what's going on, and then make decisions as you go along. This is one of the real important life challenges. One of the founders of Ohr Somayach, of Yaakov Rosenberg, he was in insurance and he was very successful. And he's working a 40-hour week and making a lot of money. He said, well, so why am I working a 40-hour week? So he cut it down to 30 hours, he cut it down to 20 hours. He made less, but he still made very comfortable living, so he didn't. I have a friend, let alone that. He in America, he opened up two businesses. One was a jewelry business, one was a travel agency. He came here, and he retired. He started learning full-time with Dov Schwartzman in Sanhedrin, and he learned for years full-time. Then his children it's up to time for his children to get married, needed money. So he went back and started working long distance in those businesses and then able to take some of the profits of the businesses. He worked when he needed it. When he didn't need it, he didn't work. So, if you're successful like that, you have that option. That's the way you look at it. So I think there's no one rule for everybody, but it's very important to be conscious that this is the kind of decision you make as you go through life and reevaluate as you go through life. It's part of serving God in an open-eyed, realistic way. Yeah, what else is there?
I wanted to ask a question. There's a Gemara in Avoda Zara that speaks about that Chita Egel was a gezeirah.
No, it was not. But that's has a mamar on this. What it says there is, and it compares with Dovid HaMelech, right?
Yeah.
Both of them. What they said is this: as a person grows in life, there are certain battles that he fights. Sometimes he wins the battle, to the extent that the Yetzer Hara switches tactics and moves to a different battle. Right? You're not going to tempt Rav Chaim Kanievsky with a cheeseburger. Sorry, it's not going to work. It's a waste of time. They said of the Gra, for example, what could you? I'm learning. I'm thirsty. I'm tired. Boy, would I like an iced coffee. I can make it for myself. It'll only take 12 and a half minutes, right? Should I take off the 12 and a half minutes? Yes, no, sometimes to win the battle, sometimes to lose the battle. You couldn't tempt the Gra with an iced coffee. So that's not where the battle is. The battle for the Gra was, a Malach came to him and said, I'll give you an injection of Torah, free of charge. How about that? And he said, no, Torah is not worth it unless you work to gain it. He had to say no to Torah. That was a test for him, okay? So as you develop in life, certain things that were tests at age 21, at 45 aren't tests anymore. Okay, what Akash Baruch Hu did here was artificially return the vulnerability to something which they had long since passed, long since outgrown, so as to be able to teach tshuva to, in the case of the Egel, to the nation, to Dovid HaMelech to the individual. Because if the Yetzer Hara is going to test them on their level, no one else later will be able to learn a lesson from it. Because the Gaon and the angel promised him Torah, he said, no, what's it going to do with me? I'm not on that level. I can't identify with that. I can't take comfort from the fact that he was tempted, so I should be able to take comfort with my temptations for cheeseburgers. It's just not on the same page. So Kadosh Baruch Hu artificially removed their invulnerability, made them subject to that Yetzer Hara, so that they would have a real battle in a place where they really shouldn't have had a real battle. They lost, and then it was not a gezeirah. Because Baruch Hu was not a gozer. And in particular, had he been gozer, then it wouldn't have been a chait. They couldn't have been punished for it, and it couldn't be a lesson for those of us who weren't subject to a gezeirah making a free decision. It wouldn't work. That's not what the Gemara says. Ja, was noch? Yeah.
So, I don't know. It's like a lot of Baal Shuvas like to, give tochacha to their friends and stuff. So, just like to know how do you know when your friend is somebody who you should give tochacha to, or not even tochacha, just like, give them advice. Like you see them doing something that's like, maybe not even a vera, but it's just like, really like you should avoid that,
How do you know when you should give tochacha, reproof, moral and judgment and evaluation to your friend, to somebody else? I have a one-word answer: don't. Don't. The chances of you getting it right and doing it in a productive way are very low. They're very low. I know it's one of the Taryag mitzvahs and so on and so on, but the probability of doing it wrong and doing harm is high enough that unless you have very special circumstances, you're risking too much. I have seen people hurt here. We had one boy who came from Yale, and he came, I think, on a Thursday. Friday night he slept late. He got up in the morning just in time for the meal. And he comes down. He sees everybody going over to the sink and washing their hands. Oh, okay. So he goes over and he starts washing his hands. And one of our tzaddikim goes over to him and says, "No, not like that. Use the cup. You pick up the cup with your right hand first, then put it on the left hand, and then." He was out of there. In an hour, he would pack this stuff. It was out. These guys are crazy. Now, I was asked the following question. I don't know what really happened, but I know half the story. A guy coming from the wall, whatever it was. They put him in his room to sleep. Comes back from davening. The guy has gotten up. He's standing in front of the mirror. He has lathered up his face with shaving cream. He has a stick razor in his hand, and he has shaved half his face. Is right. So there has to be, what should he have said? I don't know what he really did say, but I think what you should have said is this. Of course, the new fellow standing in front of the mirror saw him come in, and he saw him startled, So he thought, what's wrong? So the fellow holding the razor says, "Am I doing something wrong?" And I think the right thing to say would be to say to him, it's something that maybe we'll talk about at a later occasion. That's all. That's all. You risk too much by saying, it's a very derisive. You're going to get him. I half is shaved. I half isn't shaved. He's going to walk out looking like that. He's not going to make it. By the way, I know of a tshuva, a 14-year-old girl in a Friar home, decided she wanted to keep Shabbos, and her parents said to her, "You will not keep Shabbos in our home. Not only we won't, but you won't." She wrote to one of the poskim, this was like 50 years ago, and the poskim said, "Don't keep Shabbos until you can be independent." The parents, have no right to tell a child not to keep Shabbos. That's true; they have no right to do it. But you set up a battle between the 14-year-old and her parents; she's going to lose. And there's a very good chance you won't be frum. When I was becoming frum in university, we had a student who was part of our group. His parents took him out of the university and sent him for a year to a psychiatrist. And when he came back, he was really fried. They did a good job. They steamrollered him, and he never made it. So we're talking about real danger here. So he said, as long as you're in this condition where you have no independence, don't insist on keeping Shabbos. Yeah.
If you go to a Shabbos, if you're invited for a Shabbos meal by a family or a couple, and the wife starts singing with the Shabbos Smiras, Kol Isha, what should you do?
There are a lot of opinions in Kol Isha. It's not obvious that under the conditions that it's usher. It's a machlokes. A lot of opinions. I think you need to go to a posek and get a psak. I can't give it to you. I'm not a posek. I don't know halacha well at all. But I know that there's a lot of different opinions. There's a sefer called Halichos Bas Yisrael, 2-volume sefer, and he has a chapter on Kol Isha. I remember looking at the footnotes and seeing a bunch of different shitas, and my Rebbitzin, who has a seminary of 80 girls, knows it better than I do, and she said that she told me some more shitas that she heard. You need to have a psak for yourself. And the psak has to have two parts. Number one, what is the Isra of Kol Isha? Number two, what to do under those conditions. I know my Rebbe told me that in Bayit Vegan, there was a girl's seminary, not hers, and they had times when they would sing, and their voice could be heard outside. So a guy who had a porch facing that building went to a posek and asked what should be done about these girls who are guilty of Kol Isha. And he said, close your windows. Go inside and close your windows. Meaning, the fact that they're singing and they can be heard on the street, according to this posek, was nothing to worry about. So I think you have to get a psak for something like that. I don't know. I'll give you another example of something which I do know happened. A friend of mine was present when this happened. He took a fellow to Rosh Hashanah Zalman, who had the following problem. This fellow was about tshuva. His father was a conservative rabbi. The problem was he's going home for the summer. Over the summer, his father will expect him to pray in his synagogue. What should he do? Rosh Hashanah Zalman said, let him pray in the synagogue. Let him daven in the shul. Well, but after it's over, there's a receiving line. Everybody goes up and shakes hands with the rabbi, and if I'm standing there, the son said, shake hands with me. So stand there. But the women are going to shake hands also. And he said, shake hands with them. Rabbanei Ashkenaz hitiru v'hem lo hayu shkatzim. The rabbis of Germany permitted it, and they weren't shkatzim, they weren't shakets. They knew what they had a position. It's a valid position. Shlomo Zalman told him, yes, you can do that because you can rely on the rabbis of Germany. So that's physical contact. So that's more than Kol Isha. So you really need a psak from a posek what to do under those conditions. These things, don't ever assume that what you heard and what you think is the ruach hazman and everything else. Don't ever assume. Always go and ask. A friend of mine had a yeshiva. It doesn't exist anymore. And they had boys about tshuva, and the boy was very good in yeshiva. Wanted to stay a second year, but he had promised his parents that he would come back after the first year and go back to college. They went to Rav Shach. Shach said, go back and go to college. Rav Shach was fire against the university. Yes, fire. Except in this case, where he said, no, go back and go to university. Don't prejudge the Gedolim. Don't think you got this prejudging is just an ego. It's a chutzpah. I have them in my pocket. I understand them better than they understand themselves. I know what they're going to say. I don't have to ask because I know. That's just baloney. You wouldn't say it about your doctor or your auto mechanic or your investment counselor. Don't say it about them either. They're much greater than they are. Yeah.
Is there a heave in Bisman Zeh to go to mikvah or just before holidays?
Whether or not there's a chiyuv, let's say for a man, in terms of tahara, go to mikvah. I don't. Ich bin a Chassidish. I go every day. Period. So and I discovered in the last few years that not all Chassidim do that, but we do. Is there an actual chiyuv? I know that it's discussed. I know that there are some who talk about it. I thought it was on the level of a minhag. I didn't think it was a real chiyuv. I could be wrong about that. I know that it's very widespread for Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur to go, certainly Yom Kippur, maybe not every for Rosh Hashanah. And the holidays, it is widespread, but I don't think it's as widespread. Pesach, Shavuos, and Sukkot. I don't know how widespread it is, but to say it's a chiyuv, that would mean anybody who doesn't is doing an avera. I think that's probably
Okay,
too.
so-
That's probably too strong.
Like the benefits of going to the mikvah. I mean, there definitely are, but like, should one go to mikvah? Say if he's a balkari or.
Look, you're asking a Hasidish, should you go to mikveh if you're a balkari and so forth and so on. I think it depends. I think how you feel about it. If you're on a high enough level to feel that because you didn't, that something's wrong, then probably it's a good thing to do. You should definitely have in mind that you're not committing yourself to it, because it can get demanding. When I lived in Baltimore, I first moved there, the only mikveh available was a mikveh in the Yekeshul, which is filled twice a week. There was no heating system, there were no showers, just a thing of water. So they filled it with hot water. First day, and when they filled it, man, that was great. Second day was lukewarm, and the third day was cold. Okay, but you put up with it, right? The worst was the few times when the shamish put in the water and was scalding. Then you had to go in the bore. The bore is always cold and dirty and like, but if you're going to mikvah, you go to mikvah. Right? So I did that because I had committed myself to it. Don't commit yourself to it. Don't put yourself in a situation where, you have to worry about violating what could be a netter and so on and so on. Look out upon it as something that's available and something which, when you feel that there is something wrong that you want to rectify, then you should do it. But I wouldn't do anything more than that. Ja, was noch? Das ist das? Yeah.
Can I ask you a related question to one of my other questions? That if one of my friends is like, I'm on my way to, go over to my mom and tell her the truth about Judaism, I'm gonna get her on board, should I tell him like, ease up on the, or is that considered like telling somebody not to do something that's like a...
No, you're telling him not to do something that's dangerous, that will make things worse. I don't know a boy, obviously, I don't know his mother, but chances are she's convinced that he's joined a cult, and that this will confirm that's position in her mind. And you say, well, so what? I'll tell you, so what? Let's say his mother talking with one of her friends, and the friend says, you don't know what's going on. My son is becoming involved, and so forth and so on. This mother will say, get him out! Get him out! They're crazy! You don't know what, listen, let me tell you what happened to me. My son said this and this and this. They're really crazy. You don't want that to happen. And your friend could be responsible for that other boy losing out. So what you want is to interact with the parents in such a way, they say, well, we didn't bring him up that way, but from what we can tell, what he's learning isn't hurting him. What he's learning has perhaps made him more interested in us and more sensitive to us. So we're not unhappy with it, and we feel that, if it happens, it happens. That would be at least a part of a response, which would protect that friend from being clobbered by his parents, which can happen and which can make the difference.